Hello, everyone. I promise I will go live today. I know I have a little bit that I don't go live, but I promised you today that I would. And here we are. I wanted to debunk a few misconceptions that I've been seeing online. My name is Zanibel Mello, and I am in multimedia, and I was a teacher. For those of you that are new. So with me, I have an immigration lawyer, De La Torre Law, because I wanted to debunk a few things that I see a lot in the comments that I wanted to clear up. There's no better person than to clear those things up than a professional and an expert in its field. And I'll have my friend Juan de la Torre, hi, introduce himself for the new gals and that we have here and men. So I'll let him speak a little bit about his who he is, his expertise, his years in immigration, and then we're gonna go right into all of the questions that you guys have and the things that I have been seeing in the comments across social media.
Well, I want to say hello to everyone and everyone that follows Zanibel, and thank you, Zanibel, for having me here today. Juan de la Torre, I've been practicing for 15 years in the areas of immigration law, amongst other areas, such as criminal, since that's going to be a subject today, right? I do criminal defense as well. And I've been doing that for 15 years here in Central Florida. Well, my office is located in Maitland, and I'm here to answer all your questions tonight. So let's get it started.
Excellent. So I'm going to play a report from the New York Times. It's about like 3 minutes or so, and it was reporting on a misconception. And of course, we have you as the expert in immigration law and criminal law, where we have here that all undocumented immigrants are criminals. That's the first thing that we're going to discuss. We have a few questions. I hope that an hour will be enough for us, but let's get into it. Let's go.
We were recently in Miami, Florida with ICE to get an up-close look at how its arrest strategy is changing. One of President Trump's most memorable promises was this mass deportation campaign.
I think it's important to see how the rhetoric from Washington, D.C. and this increasing pressure on an agency like ICE is actually playing out in American communities.
The police is here and with my daughter.
Calm down a little bit. I can explain.
We saw the State Department helping ICE track down and arrest a man from Mexico in front of his family, which really speaks to other government agencies trying to help ICE boost their arrest and deportation numbers.
The State Department tipped us off on the case. It's a whole of government approach. That sharing of information is really a game changer for us.
What are you doing here today?
¿Qué estás haciendo hoy aquí?
A recoger a mi hermano para trabajar.
En el roofing.
Sí.
We saw somebody who was arrested who was not a target of the ICE officers.
ICE was targeting his brother. They ran his information and they decided to arrest him.
That is something that typically did not happen during the Biden administration.
That brother that we arrested today, although we haven't caught him or he hasn't committed a crime, that doesn't mean that he can't potentially commit a crime.
Right.
And as I see it, he's committed a crime the minute he enters the United States without admission. I've been doing this now 20 plus years. Feels good to have someone, basically enforce the immigration laws.
Another takeaway for me is just that ICE, they feel kind of emboldened. They feel free in a way to enforce these laws the way they feel like they should be enforced.
This is the Miramar sub-office. It's just your typical processing area. You'll see people in the line right here that are reporting it.
We went to the processing center and we were able to see this phenomenon of people checking in with the agency and being arrested as a result.
Soy una persona con todas mis familias aquí, ciudadano, no tengo delito, no tengo nada. Soy una persona de bien, trabajo en el aeropuerto.
In all these different kind of aspects, we've seen the changes of policy on the ground and the impact it can have on families. We were able to visit with the father of the Cuban man we met.
Yo estoy hoy por hoy que me cae el cielo arriba.
Mi hijo me dice, papá, váyase para la casa que me van a dejar preso. Volví loco porque fui a ver para ver si me lo dejaban ver, no me lo quisieron dejar de ver, nada.
You thinking that one day that this could happen to him, given that President Trump has taken over?
Yo estoy de acuerdo que deporten a todo el que tenga un crimen, que todo el que eso, pero una persona que está trabajando y está luchando y está haciendo sus cosas correctamente, ¿por qué tienen que deportarlo?
For the Trump administration, they see these people as kind of in the same bucket as people who have perhaps a more serious criminal history in the United States. What is the message this is sending to folks who are undocumented?
The message is clear that we are treating those individuals as criminals. They should depart voluntarily. We're not going to say that someone is a non-criminal.
In the first few months of the administration, there hasn't been any type of, mass deportation. The reality is that it's really difficult, the hours and manpower needed for every single arrest. But as we've seen in LA with these anti-ICE protests, the administration's aggressive push for numbers has ignited a new battle over the limits of federal power. And the government is looking for every possible way to add more resources and more officers to help with this effort.
Alrighty then, so even the ICE agent is using the word criminal for undocumented. Can you please tell us what does this mean? Are they really criminals when they're undocumented? You tell us.
Entering the United States without an entry permit or without knocking at the door and gaining access to the U.S. with the permission of immigration is not in of itself a crime. However, let me clarify. If you are ordered removed from the United States and you come back after an order of removal, that is codified specifically as a crime. So the word that you used earlier about whether all immigrants and even the words of the immigrant, the officer,
ICE.
the ICE officer, was an overgeneralization. And yes, they're trying to capture this idea in rhetoric that just because you entered illegally, that in of itself is a crime because of the term illegal. You hear illegal, but when you go to court, you could be in a civil setting and you could be talking about something that's not within the law, right? So illegal, not within the law. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a crime, right? You can be in civil court discussing things that are outside the parameters, whether it's procedure or statute or case law that is not in agreement with the procedures that were followed or an act that was committed in that case, such as in a personal injury case, for example, right? But that doesn't mean per se that it's a crime, right? So, and I think really what it is at the end of the day, and it's shameful, really. It's shameful to over generalize and over characterize an entire group of people. I mean, they're changing their targets for a reason because they can't make the numbers that President Trump promised without changing their targets, right? The Biden administration, the Obama administration, I think even the Bush administration prior to that, were all targeting as a high priority people who have committed crimes. I fear that the president, in terms of making a numerical quota, is actually going to let people slip through the cracks who are committing crimes, because now you're more focused on meeting a numerical quota for deportation as opposed to getting the people who should be in the highest priority for exit, right? Per capita, immigrants are not committing higher levels of crimes than our counterparts who have U.S. residency or U.S. citizenship. It's just not happening. Most people that are here in the United States are in an immigrant capacity are working. How many people I've met that let's take the Venezuelan example for one, that come here from South America, Central America, other parts that are at times even professionals in their country. And when I asked them, why have you left your country? You're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're an engineer, where you're from, why would you leave your country? Is that, the insecurity caused by political persecution, such as in Venezuela, had my family feeling unsafe. We were the subject of kidnappings, murders, extortion, etc. So we came to the United States to seek a better life. Like that story that is founded upon Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty. We are a nation of immigrants, and we are moving away from that if we continue to support these policies. We need this immigrant community to provide a workforce. In Florida alone, we're seeing a shortage in the hospitality industry. My colleagues in the construction industry are starting to tell me that, the job sites are starting to see less and less workers. These are industries that are going to be severely affected. I don't know if you've been to some restaurants. They say, I went to a restaurant, they barely had any staff, So this is something that needs to be addressed, not only as appealing to our humanity, as how should this process go on? Why are we targeting schools, right? Why are we targeting immigration courts if we want people to go through a due process and fix their process, as we've stated previously? Why are we targeting this? And let's go back to this concept of the entry. The entry is where it all starts, right? It's a misnomer, even as the ICE officer stated, that because they entered illegally. How many people, humanitarian parole is something that just happened, that they're revoking that for the Cubans, the Venezuelans, the Haitians.
That happened today. Like
Correct.
4 hours ago today. Yes.
Correct. So those people who entered on humanitarian parole were issued an I-94. And with an I-94, it used to be a piece of paper that they would give you, and along with a seal and a passport or your travel document, that it would indicate you have obtained a valid entry into the United States and you're lawfully admitted for a period of time. With the tourist visas, typically 6 months. On a humanitarian parole and certain other types of entries, it would say D/S, which means duration of status, right? Now, the president has the right, within the immigration purview, that they have revoked this status for these nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, right? But that doesn't mean that these individuals can't fix their situation, because they already have a valid entry. So if they have been here for many of them were issued 2-year work permits. They've been here for 2 years, met someone, fell in love, and want to get married, or out of love, let me be clear, right? Doing it right, then they have a lawful status and they can adjust status that way. So that's something I want to be clear on, is that just don't give up if certain privileges have been revoked. There might be another means. But going back to the original point, this is an overcharacterization. The clip of the amount of people that are committing crimes as quote unquote immigrants is much lower per capita than it is for our counterparts. And I say our counterparts because I consider myself an immigrant. I am first generation American. I was born in New York, but my mom is the American immigrant story, immigrating here in the 1960s. So yeah, I feel very much a part of the immigrant community, and I think our immigrant community has so much to offer. But I've gone on and I've ranted, because you got me here tonight, and now I'm on my soapbox. I haven't talked a lot about this issue. I haven't.
Because we're all working and we're trying to do this for the community.
But asylum it's under attack. Why are we doing this? And I understand that it was one of the questions you sent me ahead of time, and I'm sorry, I'm just getting to it, because today in my office I had a physician, and I'm going through his history. He's like, I'm a physician in my country. He's got an MBA and he's on an asylum. It's a good story. He's the subject of religious persecution as a Christian in a Muslim country, but he should be granted asylum. We should seriously consider, because the overgeneralization in the asylum section is that that everyone here who's asking for asylum is just asking for a frivolous claim. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, just like lawsuits, right? They say we're a country of lawsuits. There's a lot of frivolous lawsuits, and there may be frivolous claims, but you should address the claims on its merits. You should allow people the rights that are provided under the United States Code to obtain their work permit, to live here while their interview is pending. But what they're doing is that they're trying to force people into detention, overcrowd the detention centers, and basically force them to sign auto deportations, because the other option is I'm detained while I'm pending my asylum, which I want to distinguish that those individuals with an asylum status have a pending status. They're not here illegally. They're not here without permission of the United States. Many of them have entered via a visa, or like the humanitarian parolees, they knocked at the door and they were allowed in.
Mm-hmm. I had a question in regards to, excuse me, what happened in Los Angeles recently. That everything started because ICE agents were just taking people from Home Depot. I mean, is that something that they can do? Is it legal? To my understanding, you needed to have an order of deportation from a judge for people to be removed from the United States. Can you clear that up a little bit as far as the legality of that?
I have a number of concerns with that. The better question is, where should I begin? It's like I have a shirt that says, for example, back when I used to do grassroots work, I was thinking about wearing it tonight. I was like, am I going to make a statement tonight? And the shirt.
You can make a statement on Saturday with a national protest. Right. Come with us. We have a little group going.
The shirt says, "Do I look undocumented to you?" Right?
Yes.
So, thank you. Next time, I'm just gonna wear it. But my point is, it's a stereotype, right?
Yes.
That because you're standing at Home Depot looking for work, and I'm not ashamed to say this. My brother, who is a United States citizen, calls me all the time, and he does carpentry, and he does a variety of handyman services, and he tells me that he goes to Home Depot to hustle some work. I mean,
some extra money. Yeah.
What's wrong with that, right? And my problem with that, and now that we've seen documented cases of it, is that you're getting people who are lawfully here in the United States caught up in the crossfire, right?
Yes. We have seen that. Yeah.
I joke with my brother. I say, you better take your passport with you, because you're frequenting an area that has a stereotype for people that are undocumented status, and then the other stuff that is just, it's silly, right? Because we don't want individuals such as these individuals here because they're not working, but then yet they're taking American jobs. But here they are hustling at Home Depot, and then you take them off the streets, and all of a sudden these job sites.
Isn't that racism doesn't have like any logic? That's what it is.
I mean,
like you have to make like a mental gymnastic, like because they're like, oh, they're not paying taxes, but then you're going to the IRS to get their information to go get them, snatch them because they're being snatched.
By the way, I'm going to plug One Blood. For those of you that don't know, One Blood, they collect blood donations. I'm drinking out of their cup tonight, so I'm going to plug One Blood. One Blood. If you haven't donated blood, donate blood. I'm O positive, one of the more universal blood types. Blood donation saved my wife's life, so please donate. But yes, by all means, that I hate to say that there is a certain level of blatant discrimination and racism, right? Because I mean, let's not get started on the South African situation, but it seems like certain migrants of certain ethnicities and certain backgrounds and certain cultures are the ones that are being targeted for removal. And how do you show up to a Home Depot site and just randomly pick out who you're going to start picking up, right? Without a warrant. So the illegality of just randomly searching people on the street, there's no reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. And even going back to the ICE officer's comments, right? Let's just say that he's articulating that the reasonable suspicion that a crime is committed is just the mere fact that they're present in the United States with an undocumented status. Well, how do you know that before you start asking questions, right? We don't live in a police state. This is still a democracy. We still have the freedom to travel and cross state lines, and the freedom to engage in commerce, whether it be in public, at Home Depot, across state lines. These are all constitutional rights that we have in this country. And that's another thing, right? There's a debate now as to whether the Constitution applies or doesn't apply. I mean, I can't believe we're even having this debate in the 21st century, to be honest with you. But the concept of whether the Constitution applies only to U.S. citizens and not to individuals who are here as our guests. I mean, the Constitution clearly states that it applies to everyone who's here in our land, right?
Can you repeat that like 3 times? Because that is like the most I say it all the time, and it boils my blood.
And the Constitution clearly states that it applies to everyone who's here in this land. The Constitution clearly states that it applies to everyone who's here in this land. So, I mean, it's absurd. The courts, getting back to debunking some of the myths. The court is conservative, but I think the court is doing its job. The court is pumping the brakes. The court is pumping the brakes in a way that I think should be expected, frankly, right? That the systems of checks and balances is there for that reason. The president cannot just change the constitutional amendment by an executive order. That's why we have the supremacy clause of the Constitution. So the courts is there, but more importantly, for those people who are like, I didn't know, I didn't think this was going to happen. I thought he was only going to go after criminals. You know, first of all, we did know that this was going to happen. You know, there was no way.
He said it.
There was no way to make statistics
like over and over again. He said it over.
Statistically, there was no way to get to the numbers he was saying that he was going to do without going basically after all immigrants, you know, period, and a story. But, you know, we're here to debunk those myths. So what do you think about all this, Zanabel?
Well, I spend my time after work like online a lot. Because I didn't even know I had like over like 5,000 on Facebook alone people. And this is the first time that I actually blocked like about 100 people. And some of them I have met personally. Just because I'm focusing my effort and my energy into like educating the people that are being affected. Like I'm redirecting my energy into like, I'm not gonna convince you otherwise, especially if you have, you know, all of these prejudices and you have racist tendencies. I have screenshots of sometimes I go live random, you know, and not in this format, you know, but less informal. And I had people, and I have screenshots of this, saying, you know, go home, tagging ICE on me and things like that, because I speak in Spanish. I never in my life had that. And I've been in this country since I was a child. My mother became naturalized and I was under the age of 18. So then I got my citizenship. Yo soy un emigrante de plátano de allá de Santo Domingo. But, you know, I decided that I needed to change, you know, just to change my focus and my energy, you know, into that. Once in a while, you know, I step in and to like correct, but people, you know, when they believe what they're going to believe, they're going to negate any facts. And that's very, very scary to me.
I agree with that. You know, I know there's a fair element of racism involved. I know there's a fair element of discrimination involved. And unlike you, I've been avoiding the news. I think I watched the news tonight specifically to prepare for this segment, but
it can have a toll to, for your mental health also.
Yeah, I was avoiding that precisely because it's not good news. There's not a lot of good news in the news right now, right? There's civil discourse in Los Angeles. There's issues and challenges against the Constitution, which is very troubling. And that's my job as an attorney. I just want to enforce the rules, enforce the Constitution, make sure that people are entitled to due process rights. And the Supreme Court has made rulings on these things. Are there certain limitations as it pertains, for example, in immigration court to constitutional rights? The answer is actually yes. There are certain limitations that the courts haven't exactly extended the full extent of the Fourth Amendment when it comes to applying it in immigration court, right? So there are specific limitations that the court has interpreted based upon the Constitution, but that doesn't take away the due process element, right? Or the right to the attorney, which is what we're seeing some very troubling things right now,
yes,
where there is not access being given to an attorney, when that's kind of one of the fundamental principles of our constitutional rights guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment as part of our due process, right? It's not only the right to remain silent, but I have the right to remain silent, and I want my attorney, right? And like, for example, right now in Orange County, Florida, right here at 33rd Street, commonly referred to as 33rd. Immigration individuals detained on an immigration capacity are being detained, and they're not being published as in custody through the jail website, right? So there is no, if you will, a chain of custody that these individuals are in custody at the jail, right? And there's been multiple accounts by colleagues that they go down to the jail, they ask for the individual, the jail will not provide any information as to the individual, which is restricting the access of the attorney to be present and to go see their client and begin in their defense. So that is a very troubling issue. The rolling around of individuals from one detention center to another detention center is almost by design prohibiting attorneys from being able to meet with their clients. There are 21st century advancements we made post-COVID, allowing attorneys to appear by video conference at immigration court or in different immigration courts. And now those advances in technology are now being restricted, making it harder for attorneys to do their job. This can't be a coincidence. This is by design or part of the process to continue to intimidate this migrant community and really force them to give up. I think the strategy is to force people to sign an auto deportation, which is very important. If you have a loved one who's detained, don't tell them immediately, do not sign anything. Do not sign anything, because the first thing they're going to try to do is auto deport you. And if you sign the piece of paper, you renounce any defenses and rights that you may have by proceeding into the immigration court system and defending your case, then you already lost. In order to obtain a bond, when you go to immigration court, you're detained, you're being transferred to a bond center. These are the criteria. And ironically, one of the criteria is immediately, have you committed any crimes while you're in the United States, right? Are you a danger to the society, right? So that's one of the things that needs to be measured immediately. The other things that are measured when you're trying to obtain a bond and be out pending the results of your case is, what are your defenses? The proffer a defense and to the immigration judge to basically indicate to the immigration judge that you have a chance that you can legalize your situation completely by becoming a U.S. resident, a U.S. citizen eventually, or if there's some other temporary status that would qualify you which those are amongst the many that are being eliminated, such as the humanitarian parole that was eliminated today, and the temporary protected status that has been eliminated for Venezuelans and other nationalities that both expire now in July and in September.
I have follow-up questions for that, two of them. I have seen a few videos, at least 3 of them, of individuals saying that they were forced to sign, like literally, like agents took their hand and made them sign it. That's number one. And number two, how can they sign a piece of paper that is not in the language that they speak? So those two things. How about if those scenarios, if you encountered in a client that comes to you with those scenarios, how would you tackle that? Like is there to do if they were forced to do this?
First and foremost, I hope that these accounts are greatly over exaggerated. And I think that, given what ICE does and what Customs and Border Patrol does, and the other entities that are assigned to protecting our border, we have to still, in a positive light, look at that. There's probably many officials working in the capacity of these organizations. I mean, just like we've seen videos of things that didn't go well, there's videos of ICE officers.
Yeah, there's extremes in both spectrums, and there's.
I want to emphasize that because and since we're here in a non-traditional medium, we're not mainstream news. Having this podcast for the purposes of sensationalizing what is happening, right? And I think that's what we tend to see a lot with both ends of the aisle. Whichever news outlet you might prefer is a bunch of sensationalism. So if there's a clip of someone acting inappropriately, obviously today we have the clip of Senator Alex, I forget his last name for some reason right now, but of the senator from California attempting to ask a question to the Department of Homeland Security director and being forcibly removed and placed into handcuffs, exercising a First Amendment right, and above all, making an inquiry on behalf of his own constituents in his state to the director of Homeland Security.
Alex Padilla.
Alex Padilla, correct. Alex Padilla. So Senator Padilla was forcibly removed. They're going to play this clip over and over again. They're going to sensationalize.
The same thing with the riots, because you had 10,000 people show up, but there's pockets of people that take advantage of the situation and entice violence and things like that.
Right.
And that the police will take care of that because they need to. That's not right.
Like going back to your Home Depot comment, it's the same thing as overgeneralizing that every individual seeking work at a Home Depot is their undocumented status. I mentioned the example of my own brother, who's a United States citizen, who obtains employment at Home Depot as well. And I make the example of overgeneralizing that the media overgeneralizes that, and plays these clips over and over again. There's some ICE officers and CBP pages that are doing it by the book, and they're doing it right. And let's not forget that their job is to remove people who are unlawfully present in the United States, which is why those individuals who are here unlawfully present in the United States should do everything they can to adjust their situation, to seek out an attorney, to speak about how they can potentially fix their situation. I don't see that I'm on camera right now, but I do see that.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened here. I think I pressed something on accident. Sorry, guys. Thank you for letting me know. I think I put my elbow on my computer.
I'm back. But we just need to stop overgeneralizing and overreacting to every single thing that's sensationalized by the media. Are there individuals that are going to do it wrong, like you mentioned? Are there people that are potentially, there are police officers in the history of time that have forced coercions. I do criminal defense. One of the standard questions when you're picking a jury in a criminal setting is, do you believe that people over the history of time have been wrongfully convicted? Are there people in prison that were sent there wrongfully because the jury got it wrong? And, you know, 99% of jurors are always going to raise their hand and say, yes, that's happened. You know, do police officers sometimes cut corners or do improper work? And, you know, maybe with the best of intentions, maybe they're frustrated that they think an individual may have actually broken the law, but they don't have enough evidence to convict. So they cut corners. Do these things happen? Yes, of course they happen. Of course they happen. And likewise, there are going to be ICE officers. They're going to CBP agents that are going to attempt to cut corners. They're going to attempt to do it not by the book. Proving that someone was coerced, you know, it is difficult. I've dealt with this in the criminal setting, right? Okay. Why? Because typically the only individuals in the room when that document was signed was law enforcement, right? And then it becomes an issue of, you know, just like we want the upstanding officers, and this is why I give credence to the officers that are doing it right, because there are many officers that are doing it right with respect. They're following the law, and they're not being inhumane, right? So we have to give a round of applause to them. What you could hope for, and I've had this situation where officers have given conflicted testimony. You know, I had a United States Marine on the stand, former United States Marine on the stand, and he abides by the code. And he said, I'm not going to lie for my fellow officer. This is not how it happened, right? And this is what I observed, right? So what you could hope for is that if there's multiple officers in the room, that one of them will stand up and say, that's not how it went down. That this is what actually.
Yeah, have more faith in the law and the people that enforce it.
And that's in a criminal setting, right?
Yes.
The difficult part in the immigration setting is that they've signed an auto deportation. Let's get back to the logistics of that. What are the chances that they even get to an attorney at that point? Because you sign an auto deportation, the logistics are being set in place for your return, your immediate return to the country of your origin. So that's a scary draconian fact that you've laid out. That it can be challenged, and this is another revelation that is disturbing, is the suspension of habeas corpus, because as it pertains to you, what logistical
and tell people what habeas corpus is.
Habeas corpus is a petition that people are entitled to pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and when there's an unlawful restraint on your liberty, right? So your liberty is restrained when you're detained in any capacity, whether you're detained by immigration, whether you're detained in criminal detention, and you've not been allowed due process in order to at least put forth a case that you're entitled to regain your freedom and regain your liberty and be outside of detention. So, the logistics behind what you're saying, considering that if someone signed their auto deportation, and hopefully they're able to explain that if they were coerced or forced to, and hopefully someone is able to explain that to a loved one by phone or some other means in a communication setting, that loved one would then have to go to an attorney and say, we need to file this petition for habeas corpus because they were coerced into signing a document. They were not provided rights. They asked for an attorney. They wanted to speak to an attorney, and they were just forced to sign this document. And then the setting for that argument and subpoenaing the officers and finding out what happened, as I was describing before, would be in federal court.
Okay. And talking about habeas corpus, Kilmer Brego Garcia was brought back. I think it was a week ago.
Right.
And it's not that, like, there's some misconception online, like we agree that we want criminals. No, like everyone, if you're accused of a crime, you have the right to prove whether you're guilty or not. Like, that is the point of the whole thing. Yes. And if the federal government has a case against him, which I actually have been learning a lot, even to download cases and like try to read them, upload them.
The Constitution, the jurisprudence is all there to protect everyone's rights.
Yes, even people that committed crimes. You are accusing me. Prove it.
more importantly, Zanabel, it's more importantly there, I think, for someone who may have potentially not committed a crime in the wrong place at the wrong time. And while yes, you can make an overgeneralization. I go back to the example of standard jury questions, right? Is the mere fact that someone accused of a crime sufficient enough for a particular juror to convict that person of a crime, right? Like just the fact that they're here and they're being accused, does that mean they're guilty already? And I think that the mind has this innate like thing that it does, when you see the news and somebody's been arrested, Diddy got arrested, this other person got arrested.
Yeah.
Oh, they
Our
had
own sheriff got arrested, and everybody's like already saying that he's guilty, and he hasn't been through court yet.
Our own sheriff got arrested. All right.
Yes.
And I would like to believe, since you brought it up, I would like to believe that someone in his position I would like to believe it's not a witch hunt. I would like to believe that someone in his position would not be, their liberty would not be taken away, their position would not be taken away without there being some evidence. And to that extent, I understand why people's innate mindset goes to like, well, he must have done something, right?
Yes.
But the due process is still there for a reason. He still has the right to confront his accusers, to go to trial by jury. Trial by jury is an enumerated constitutional amendment. Yes. Trial by jury. The confrontation clause of the Sixth Amendment is enumerated to have the right to ask questions of your accusers.
Yes.
The right to pick a jury and to have your peers decide your outcome. These are constitutional rights. It's not. And forgive me for being on my soapbox. It's not just the Second Amendment. There's the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth,
the
27
of them, right? 27.
There's
I believe.
27. If I remember correctly, it's 27. Because you're right. I concentrate so much on the Bill of Rights that it's the count goes pretty deep, right?
Yes.
So
yes. The first 10 is like we're fighting for right now. Like the Bill of Rights, yes.
The Bill of Rights being amongst the most important, obviously.
Yes.
And so I see there's a comment.
Let me see if I can see it.
Patty Sanchez, we were actually commenting about that earlier, that being in the United States in an undocumented capacity is not in of itself a crime according to U.S. code or any statute. So that's a pretty good comment. I did distinguish that though, Patty, that it is a crime to be ordered removed from the United States and then after an order of removal re-enter the United States. So that is different. That is much different from simply having crossed the border and not gained entry lawfully to the United States. But going back to that same point that we were making earlier, Patty and Zanabel, that's not what I'm troubled by. I'm troubled by the fact that people who are here pending an asylum with a work permit, with lawful documents, and the right to be here in the United States, who entered legally, many of them by humanitarian parole, by knocking on the border, by seeking this humanitarian parole at the embassy, and entered with a visa or otherwise, they obtain legal entry, and they're being targeted just as equally right now.
Yes. Another thing that another myth as we move along that we have seen over and over again online is that immigrants don't pay taxes and live off of the government. Is this accurate? And because can they get government aid if they pay into the system? First,
no,
it's like
quite the contrary, and I'll dispel this myth. And maybe again a misnomer, because sometimes immigrants have children and they're born in the U.S. and their U.S. born children are entitled to benefits. In the state of Florida, we have the WIC program that helps young mothers that are trying to get up on their feet buy formula and other things that may be needed, such as diapers and whatnot. to get started, right? When I had my first two children, I was in law school. Money was tight. We used the WIC program to get a little help and get by. I was living off of student loans. I wasn't working, and law school is a full-time commitment. So that was a huge help to us. So that's important to note that children born here in the United States that happen to be the children of immigrants, they're still entitled to those things. Now, I would say
statistically, because you have to look at the numbers. You can't just say things online based on whatever.
Statistically, immigrants probably the immigrants that are not entitled to any benefit probably pay more into the system than anyone is getting out, because they're not entitled to any benefit. There's no entitlement, right? Because they don't have a status. So in fact, many immigration applications specifically ask the question, have you ever obtained a U.S. benefit, such as, Medicaid or service like food stamps, WIC, something like that, that you are not entitled to, right? And that would be breaking the law. So many, and yet, to answer your question, many individuals obtain what's called an individual taxpayer identification number, what's called an ITIN, and they pay taxes. Some of them, like in those cases, they don't even have a social security number, and they're paying taxes.
Right. Yes. Like 96 billion or something like that.
Yeah.
I was reading,
and that doesn't count the people that I've been really focusing on tonight, which are those people with that quasi status that have a work permit, that have are waiting for a court date, that obtain legal entry into the United States. By virtue of a work permit, they can obtain a social security number, and they pay taxes too. And they're not entitled to any benefits as well.
Yes.
So,
and statistically are white Caucasians that benefit the most out of the welfare system based on the data, because it's immigrants. There's another one that says here, immigrants drain the welfare system, which is another thing that we see a lot.
But they're on roofs and picking fruit and your produce, cleaning
feeding
hotels, feeding you, taking care of the lawn care, or in another capacity, they're at your local hospital attending to you when you're sick, and both in the capacity as nurses and doctors. I have to remind people all the time, we get so caught up on the labor that's done outdoors or in a hospitality capacity, but there's a vast number of immigrants that are filling professional capacities that are not being filled by U.S. citizens or people that were born here, right? We are not studying math and sciences. We're just not. The United States citizens are not. I mention this all the time. I was mentioning today with my client, who is a physician. There's a reason even the Department of Labor has categorized nursing positions and physical therapists as positions that are already presumed to have a deficiency in the United States. They were called Schedule A positions. And the hospitals and clinics and RMC in our region, Advent Health, they recruit overseas because they don't have enough people to fill positions that here in the United States. And the government of the United States, the Department of Labor, knows this and has already categorized those positions to be deemed certified for a labor certification to be able to recruit these individuals overseas. So I'm just tired of the negative narrative about immigrants. It needs to stop. What we need to focus on is what immigrants in general do. The people who commit crimes have to go? Yes. But that was a prior, let's talk, everybody.
I think there's from both sides, we know that both the three sides, center, middle, left, right, whatever you are, we are, and the consensus is that criminals need to go, but everyone under the Constitution deserves due process. And that is if you're pointed the finger at me that I committed a crime, I deserve the right to defend myself.
Yes, I agree.
going into the sanctuary cities, which is like a common theme in the past, like 5 days of protests that started in California and they have spread across the country. And one of the things that we see here a lot and the comments, sanctuary cities are lawless and protect criminals. Can you explain to us what are sanctuary cities? Because ICE is specifically in those cities.
Well,
And
I'm going to use examples that are closest to home under the Immigration Nationality Act 287G. The federal government has moved to deputize local law enforcement in order to enforce immigration priorities, such as the detainment of people who are not here lawfully in the United States. This could happen in something as simple as a traffic stop. But what we're starting to see is that typically, while it was tied to some type of unlawfulness, typically driving without a license or something like that, we're now beginning to see that people are being detained simply for the purpose of CBP or ICE arriving on the scene to take those individuals into custody. So they're not being charged with crimes. They're just being collected by ICE or CBP immediately. The Broward County Sheriff is now under scrutiny and under threat of removal by the Attorney General of the state of Florida, precisely because he does not want to participate in the immigration purview. Congress and the Supreme Court has, previously, the Supreme Court specifically has stated that immigration is the purview of the federal government. The finances are not in place for local entities to do the job of the federal authorities. That's not why we pay local property taxes and local sales taxes. That is not the purposes of the funds for those purposes. Now, the federal government has a budget for these things, and that they can implement it, and that's what they should do. That's what CBP is there for. That's what ICE is there for. And that the sanctuary concept is precisely that. These communities and cities, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, where the mayors and the local authorities are saying we're not going to participate in the federal priorities, which kind of ironic because I am a registered Republican, and traditionally the purview of conservative politics has been the separation between states' rights and federal rights, right? So if the Supreme Court has stated that the purview of immigration is the federal purview, then it should be their job to enforce these priorities. And if local officials at the state or even city level do not seek to participate in that, that is the concept of separation, states' rights and federal rights. So that's what it comes down to. But everyone's going to have a difference of opinion about that. It's like everyone has an opinion about something. There's a saying about that, but I'm not going to say it on air. It has to do with the people's rear end.
Yes.
But
at this point, everybody don't have filters right now. Everybody's like living mad every time from the moment they wake up.
Everyone is worked up. Everyone is watching way too much news. We have to maintain a cool head. Even my 16-year-old asked me these questions driving in the car one day, having legitimate concerns about the Constitution and whether it would hold. And I had to reassure
it's being tested right now, but through observation. Yes, through observation.
It's being tested, and if you want to make an argument, maybe Trump is just seeing how far he can push his limits. Let me rephrase that. Trump is definitely trying to see how far he can push his limits. As long as he understands there's 3 branches of government, not one. And we were founded upon this principle of checks and balances between our Congress, the executive branch, and the court system, right? The court system, if it issues injunctions or orders, it should be followed. and the interpretation of the law is ultimately in the hands of the Supreme Court of the United States, right? So, as for example, they made a decision about abortion. They overturned Roe versus Wade. They put it back in terms of this conversation about the difference between state rights and federal rights. They put it back in the hands of the states. And now we see different laws in different places when it comes to abortion. Likewise, that is the concept that I was presenting in terms of the difference between federal and state rights when it comes to immigration. The purview is that of the federal government. So if local authorities are deciding not to participate in the agenda of the federal government, that is a separation of federal and state rights.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to move on to our next thing where it says, yes, there's more. Look, this is the polls from yesterday from the Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, man.
And yes, and the U.S. is being invaded, and people are saying that this is an excuse to send out the military across the nation and, say that we're being invaded or there's an insurrection. But you know what? I am very proud. You guys should go ahead to the Department of Homeland Security Facebook page and click on the comments. People are... There's some pretty funny things in there, actually. There's some very funny comments in there. And I was like, wow, like people are like speaking out and they're not taking it,
Well, the concern in using the United States military domestically is whether that violates the Posse Comitatus Act. And the Posse Comitatus Act is that the President of the United States, as the Commander-in-Chief, can only in very limited circumstances use the military in a domestic capacity, because you're not supposed to turn the military on your own citizens. The role of the United States military is to protect the interests of the United States abroad, to keep our borders safe abroad. We have law enforcement agencies that are supposed to do their jobs domestically, CBP, ICE, and in the case of Los Angeles, they have their own local police. The state has their own National Guard, or their version of it, and the National Guard, to a certain capacity, can be called in to that extent, but not the United States Marines. I disagree with that position. And traditionally, what you've seen when the United States Marines have been called in, or not the Marines per se, but the United States military, because in Hurricane Andrew in 1992, we had the 82nd Airborne. Basically, helping in recovery efforts and maintaining security, because everything was dark, there was no electricity. We were essentially kind of in a war zone because everything was destroyed, and they were there in that capacity. And the military has been deployed multiple times in that concept to help after disaster relief, earthquakes, hurricanes, etc. But this is different. Now you're turning them into a law enforcement role on domestic land against people who are citizens and residents of this country. Are there undocumented individuals caught up in the crossfire? This is what this is about. And I think that if, it's kind of like the policing issue, right? If you police with a certain level of humanity in your community, then you earn the respect of your community. If you treat people like dirt, people are going to react in that capacity. And for however many peoples that may be quote unquote undocumented, especially in the greater Los Angeles area and California, there has to, you can imagine that those people are related to people who are citizens. They have brothers that were born here.
Yeah, when you see the videos, it's mostly young people
right
out there, which since they're exposing themselves, I'm assuming they are citizens, because in your right mind, if you're undocumented, you're not gonna be in front of a police officer protesting. Like, damn it,
I'm sure. There's been other videos where people went to protest and they got roped up in the protest because they did. But I'm sure there's some. But I mean, I think the point that is being made by the Los Angeles protests is that you can't roll up with military-style vehicles with masks on and start snatching up people in the streets in a community. That is police state type stuff. We understand, do some police work. Go figure out who's really undocumented. But you just can't start randomly knocking on people's doors saying, hey, are there any undocumented people here? What's your immigration status? Prove up your immigration status. Because what are you doing now? We're back to Arizona and SB, I think it was 72, something like that, where it was essentially an ask me for your papers type situation. I've mentioned this on the prior show, right? I went down there and I protested that years ago. I think it was then Governor Brewer and Sheriff Arpaio. They had this whole agenda where people had to basically show that they had papers. I mean, and I don't know if you know this, but you apply for a U.S. passport now. It's in my wallet. They're issuing national identification cards that prove a United States citizen, and I'm carrying it with me. Right?
I'm carrying with me too.
Because I asked you earlier. I asked you earlier if I looked undocumented, and you said yes.
Yes. I stand by that. Un plátano, tenemos un plátano, tenemos.
And what I'm saying is that you can't randomly stop people, without there being an articulable suspicion that they have committed some crime that doesn't fit their description because they look a certain way, right? But
this is what the Department of Homeland Security did. I think they're gearing up to have an excuse, because we're being invaded, to have the military deployed nationwide. I mean, that is an opinion. That is an opinion that I have based on that.
Look, we're only about 180 days into this, barring some shocking revelation that would even lead the president's own party to impeach their own president, which I find highly unlikely. So we have 3.5 years to go, and what we need to do is promote
Congress. We get to choose. It's 17 months.
Thank you.
We get to vote.
I was referring to the 3.5 years left on the president's term.
I know, by the way, give us some hope.
I think Zanabel is jumping in immediately to say that in addition to the checks and balances of the Supreme Court, it would be nice to have a check and balance of Congress, particularly with the House and or the Senate. And people should go out and vote, and I think that, like a friend of mine would say prior to the election in 2024, he would say, well, you should vote your own interest. Right? It's an American concept. Vote just what's good for you, right? And a lot of people, I think, essentially did that. A lot of people did that. They thought the economy would get better, and they thought that the price of eggs would go down, and gas prices would go down. And I don't think we're seeing that. I think gas prices have stayed more or less above $3, in our area. And I can't imagine what they are in California. It was high when I was there a few years ago. It must be high now. Eggs are still expensive. Tariffs are causing whatever they're causing, and it looks like it's going to cause a recession. Here we go on another round. Let's vote our interest. And it's up to the American public, and we need to have that discourse. And the debate needs to be there to say, hey, you thought this was going to happen a certain way. You may not agree with the inhumanity of how they're doing the immigration process. You may not agree with the tariffs now that you understand them better. You may not agree that the economy is getting better. And if you don't, if that's your view, then I would think that you're changing your vote now in the midterm election, because the country needs to move in a different direction, and we need to pump the brakes. I think Zanabel is so hopeful. Look at me, I'm sounding so middle of the road, and Zanabel is just like, we gotta get rid of this dude.
Yes.
It's like
make sure you're registered to vote for Senate and your congressman, the people that represent you. There's a lot of seats that are going to be up for your senator.
So
And
every time I come on here, we're over 8 minutes now. We're on an hour and 8 minutes.
yeah, I'm taking it. It's an hour and 4 minutes. So 2 more things before we
That's good.
say goodbye, because these things take a little bit. I want you to tell our community whether or not they should go to their immigration hearing, because there's a lot of fear that if they go to their immigration hearing, then they may never come back.
The answer is yes. Yes, you should go to your immigration hearing. If you don't go, you will be ordered removed from the United States in absentia. And at that point, a warrant will be issued for your pickup. So, you're handing them exactly what they want if that's the case, if you do not appear for your hearing. Do I think that there's a certain amount of violating the due process provision of the Constitution by intimidating people to the extent that this has never happened before. Right now it's happening that at certain immigration hearings, people are being detained. They're doing it precisely to cause this fear where people are going to be like, I'm just not going to go to my hearing. But what's the result of that? You're automatically removed. You don't appear before the judge, you're automatically removed. If you appear and God forbid you're detained, the process is still in place. Whatever defenses you had can still be argued. You can also argue for a bond, as I stated before, and you may qualify for that bond if you have not had any criminal acts and you have a good defense and you're not a flight risk. You're showing that you're going to appear for hearings, right? So, people stop appearing for hearings. Now you are flight risk. You don't appear for a hearing, you are automatically removed from the United States. So you're conceded defeat to your immigration situation if you don't appear for your hearing. So, and is there a legitimate reason to be concerned and to be fearful in this process? I don't want to be in these people's shoes, right? And I had to have that. Remember, my client today, he's a physician with an MBA, right? This is a guy who's a doctor with an MBA. Obviously I can't say names, right? But and I have to go with him to court. And he asked me the same question, should I go? And I was like, yes.
Can you request to have your hearing online?
Typically the respondent has to appear in person. There are limited sets of exceptions for, like, if somebody doesn't appear, for example, and I'll come back to your online example, but like if somebody were not to appear at all, like because they were hospitalized, maybe a death in the family, or some other type of extreme emergency, such as those that I just mentioned, then they can have an order of removal set aside. Another way to have an order of removal set aside is if you didn't get proper notice, but that's a whole other matter. But not so. If you were to be granted an online situation, it's most likely because you have an emergency situation that prohibits you from being present physically. Now, so that answers that question. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, because this is very typical, and I've seen immigration judges do this for since I've been practicing 15 years, is they will excuse minors, particularly during the school year. They don't want people missing school, and the parent will have to come or the guardian will have to come, but the minors are typically excused.
What if you solicit for an online hearing? Like, what is the length of time that you have to solicit that, if it were something that could be an option?
I would have to check the procedures for that, but I that's not one I do very often. I like to go in person, and
but the option is there. Is that correct? The option is there. It does
believe it's
exist?
there in limited circumstances. The attorneys. I remember at the beginning I said that not attorneys. One of the things that was a byproduct of COVID-19 is that they allowed attorneys to appear via video conferencing, like we're appearing right now, and they're starting to limit that in certain places. So you can imagine that they're starting to limit the appearance of the attorney when the respondent is required to appear. I can't imagine that the opportunity to appear online is just open-ended for a respondent. It has to be very limited circumstances if it's available. But I've never used it. I've never participated in a hearing that way. So I'm not going to speak to that on that particular one because I don't have particular information for you at this time.
Is there anything that, just in case, to protect yourself, is there anything that you can do in case you get detained and your children are left in limbo?
Yes. I think I spoke about this last time I was on. You should execute a power of attorney to a loved one. If you have, in our Latino communities, there's always a comadre, a compadre, the godfather, the godmother, a sister, somebody who has a status that is willing to take your children in the worst case scenario. I hate to equate your possible detention and removal from the United States to death. But just like your plan for your estate plan, like having a will, having a durable power of attorney, having all these things in place so that you leave your loved ones in a position where they can get by and make do. Likewise, there's a power of attorney for taking guardianship of a child. There's a power of attorney for making medical decisions, and there's a power of attorney for making educational decisions. So if you leave these three documents in place for a comadre, a compadre, an uncle, an aunt, then in the event that you may be detained, your child can automatically be legally under the guardianship of the individual that you authorized in these documents, so that while you're detained, you don't have to worry that your children are just roaming the streets without
or left alone in school with nobody to pick them up.
Left alone in school or coming home to an empty home. I think that the important thing is to remember history, to read. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I think people should just inform themselves, remember the historical concepts. I won't go as far as to make certain comparisons, but to echo the words of Anne Frank, kids were coming home to empty homes.
Yes, I posted that today. I shared that today.
Their parents had just disappeared. I got to visit that when I was I think 16 years old in Holland, the home where Anne Frank actually hid.
Yes. I was there. I ate lunch in front of her house. I couldn't go in because the line and the wait that and the registration online is like a year in advance that you have to make it. It's that important. Like, it's incredible. I didn't know that. So I was like, I'm just going to pass by, eat lunch and go inside. Yeah, right. No, no.
Yeah, so
something so real.
It was a long time ago, but there's a whole historical tenet, and I guess because maybe I minored in history, that if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Correct.
I think that we just have to operate all these legal tenets that we've discussed tonight, and the protections of the Constitution and our institutions that have been founded by our forefathers were put into place precisely to protect people and protect us from ourselves, even our mistakes, right? That's why the amendment process to the Constitution exists, because even our forefathers realized that the Constitution itself was an imperfect document that may need to be corrected with time. The 21st Amendment, abolished the 18th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. There amendments that granted blacks the right to vote, women the right to vote, individuals that did not have this capacity. So as a society, we realized that our forefathers gave us the tools to correct the errors that potentially we made in our past, or that we were not yet ready as a society to accept. So we have a duty now to acknowledge that and to study that. I always said to my kids, when we talk about immigrants and the citizenship process, I always say to my kids, is like, you better be able to pass a citizenship test if it was given to you. You're a U.S. citizen. You live here in the United States. There shouldn't be a reason why a foreign national comes to this country lawfully, becomes a resident lawfully, and then takes the U.S. citizen exam, and they know more about our history, our civics process than the average American.
And it's true, because I actually have a few comments that I have to respond to tomorrow, where some Caucasians, they're born, raised here, and everything, and they're saying in that comment, which I'm going to respond tomorrow, that that the Constitution does not apply to immigrants and not people that don't have their documents.
Well, you're just repeating rhetoric that you're hearing in the news, right? I stated earlier, it does apply. If you're here in the United States and you're on this land, the laws apply to you, right? So by that same
it says people, like I have 5 copies of the
Constitution, which applies to everyone, right? If that doesn't apply to everyone because that person is here unlawfully, then are they really here unlawfully? Then what is it the law that makes them unlawfully? So that you can't have it both ways. Either the law applies or it does not apply. So the law must apply to everyone. It must apply to everyone equally. There are limitations, to be clear and to be candid, there are limitations to certain provisions of the Constitution being used specifically in an immigration court setting. As I said before, the Fourth Amendment, as for example. So yes, there's limitations, but that doesn't mean that the rules don't apply. Due process applies. The Immigration and Nationality Act, which was signed into law and enacted by passed by Congress, then applies, right? There's a supremacy clause and there's a pecking order to how rules should be applied, with the Constitution being what are the key words? The supreme law of the land. That's why laws are sometimes made invalid and certain actions by any president, whether it be an executive order or some other act, also deemed invalid because it's unconstitutional. Going back to the term illegal, that's illegal, right? Yes. It's not per se a crime, but it's illegal. If you're not doing something within the legal confines of the Constitution, it's illegal by definition. So let's coin this term for what it is. Illegality is because it's not within the confines of what the law says is permissible, not necessarily a criminal act, which is where I think we started the conversation. And what they say, when you get back to where you started the conversation, you're almost there. But you can keep me going. I think every time we go over.
And I'm sure I'm going to see you yet again with other situations. Well, hopefully not. Hopefully not.
The situation will continue to unravel itself.
But what keeps me at peace is that the Supreme Court, they seem it seems to be functioning, because they shut down this fool saying that he wants to take the if you're born on the U.S. soil, you're not U.S. citizenship, not all these crazy stuff that he that he's putting out there. They're like, no, that's unlawful. And you have the civil rights organization, the ACLU, which is representing those cases in LULAC in the Supreme Court. They've won that case 3 times, and he keeps going back.
Well, I think that and if you've seen any of the president's autobiographies or even what do they call it when they make a video, a movie out of it, the movie the documentary, okay, whatever you want to call it. The president, has a no lose mentality, right? So he wins at all costs, and it doesn't matter what the cost is, and that's a part of his personality that I think that a great part of the American populace, obviously by the fact that they voted for him, has been attracted to. And I'm detracting from the points of there being a dark side to that part of the electorate. That I don't think that includes everyone. My in-laws voted for Trump. I have family members that voted for Trump, and I'm not going to sit here and believe that makes them bad people, right? Does the position potentially change based upon policies and what is currently happening? We have, again, if we're going to trust in our institutions and move forward in the democratic process, we have to trust that if the American people find that they made a mistake, which, we're all human beings, we all make mistakes. If we find that we made a mistake and we voted for the wrong guy or the wrong party, then we can change the direction of that in the midterm, like you stated before, and we can change the direction of that during the next presidential election.
Yeah.
Let's just remember that we have elections and there's a reason. And people, when they win, and there's a winner and there's a loser, and the losers need to resound to the fact of a peaceful democratic process and turnover of power until the next race or election occurs. So that those are the institutions that we have to constantly remind our people of. Instead of this discourse, instead of this, let's turn on each other like what's happening in LA. Let's put Marines on the ground and fight, U.S. citizens, and people. Let's mention the elephant in the room. How people talk about the potential of a civil war. We're a young country when you really think about it.
Yes, I see that comment a lot on the comments.
Founded 1776, July 4th is around the corner. Most countries in the world have had at least 2 civil wars, right? We've had one. And, do I want to believe or think that we're headed in that direction? No. But if we're not going to get to that direction, it has to be upon the respect of the institutional protections and the Constitution of the United States. Those are the documents, the institutions in terms of the separation of powers and what the Supreme Court does in terms of its interpretation of the laws and limiting what the president can do by saying that's not within the confines of the Constitution, Mr. President, you can't do that. And we have to respect that. Right? There can't be a purview that the president has a blank ticket to act at will. And I caution anyone who views it that way, because if the electoral process in the institution holds, as I say, remember that cookie crumbles both ways.
Yeah.
Because the next person in power,
I know. Yeah. And I don't know why they say that. Like, really?
Yes.
How about if you don't like something that a Democrat is doing? Like, you gotta,
Right.
but you voted for this, for the other guy,
Correct. And our leaders in Washington need to put on their big boy pants and their big girl pants and, stop worrying about whether they're getting reelected every 2 years and whether they're going to get reelected into Senate and hold power for 30 years and put forth the American people first and start putting forth an agenda that solves our problems, not plays tit for tat politics, which is what we've done for the last 10 to 15, maybe 20 years. I argue that this political discourse in large part started with, the division of Gore v. Bush and the Supreme Court ruling on that and how divided we were then. But even at that time, we found unity, particularly around the events of 9/11. So there's a spirit. I was watching that documentary about 9/11 on Netflix, and I was reliving the whole thing all over.
Me too. I saw that.
And as horrific as the events were, as fearful as we were as a nation, there was one beautiful thing that rose from that. And I sadly, it didn't last that long, right? But I remember how many people would drive around shortly after that waving their American flag outside their vehicle. And at that moment in time, it didn't matter whether you're black, brown, white, green, Democrat, Republican, independent, Green Party, whatever. We all saw the red, white, and blue equally at that moment in time. And I think that a large part of, if not all of the populace, was saying that, okay, if that problem came to our shores, we were all ready to defend this nation. That's part of the oath. That's part of the oath and affirmation of becoming a United States citizen. Are you willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States? Are you willing to perform in a civil capacity to help the United States in the event of a conflict, right? And we all felt we were at war.
Yes.
With a foreign nation, a real war. We were attacked,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And we were all ready to step up in defense. And I'm sure, because it's documented, that a large number of those individuals that went into the military happen to be undocumented individuals as well.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
let's not forget, they stood with
Yes.
us too. They stood with us too. You know, that we've talked about for a long time. You know, there's provisions, special provisions carved out for military personnel on a pathway to citizenship. Now, we haven't made it that clear that an enlistment equals citizenship, but there's certain benefits in enlisting, of course. So this is the discourse I think we should have over the next 2 years to 4 years. The Constitution will hold, elections will happen, the results will be what they will be. And, you know, election or no election, it doesn't give you a mandate to treat people with less humanity or less than a human being, and to basically cater to fear and institute fear in these communities. That's what you're seeing in LA. That's what the response is. Are there, just like the Black Lives Matter movement, just like let's use the January 6ers, right?
Yes.
I'm sure that even amongst the January 6ers, there were many peaceful protesters, but there were the few amongst the many that ruined it for everyone, who did become violent, who did take actions against law enforcement.
We saw that in the Rodney Kings too, that the I believe the army was deployed in 92 when that happened, but because you have a select few, you know, that will do it. It's just how it is, you know.
When you stand up for the Constitution and you stand up for the rights of others, and you're not only standing up for the rights of others, you're standing up for your own rights. That's what you're standing up for.
Yes.
Okay. The Bill of Rights protects us all, and it applies to everyone. You're standing up for your own rights. It's the American way. It's the red, white, and blue. Let's close it with that.
Let's close it with that. It's great. I am going to invite everyone this Saturday, if you will. We're gonna be meeting in City Hall in downtown from 5 to 7. And I'm gonna play this clip real quick for you guys, because we're gonna be protesting peacefully on Saturday. If you guys start, you know, throwing rocks at police, you are on your own.
Don't do that.
You are on your own.
Don't do that.
Don't do that.
But if you do that and you get arrested, call us at the Delatory Law Firm.
That's right. Delatory. And in the state of Florida, I believe you get like 5 to 20 years locked up if you do that. So think twice. All right.
Yes. Think twice. Think 3 times, because you know, battery in a law enforcement is a felony, and especially if there's weapons involved.
So I'm gonna show this video, and then we're gonna say goodbye.
Every day across this country, something powerful is happening. People are rising for each other, for democracy, and for our collective freedom. We have chosen not to live in fear or let division destroy this country. We believe in something bigger than ourselves and the promise of freedom and justice for all. But now, our rights and our freedoms are under attack. We can point fingers, or we can take action. This spring, millions of us united for one of the largest peaceful protests in the history of the United States. Together, we told Trump and his billionaire administration to keep their greedy hands off our healthcare, our veterans' benefits, our public lands, our rights. Courage is contagious, and now we're taking to the streets again on Saturday, June 14th for No King's Day. While Trump wastes tens of millions of taxpayer dollars on a military parade for his birthday, acting like a wannabe king. People in every state have organized over 1,800 events in their communities to uphold democracy and protect our rights. People standing side by side for the future we all deserve. We don't do kings in the United States. We believe power belongs with the people. Join us on Saturday, June 14th. Go to nokings.org to find the protest near you.
Thank you so much.
That's the First Amendment at its finest. The right to assembly.
Yes.
The freedom of speech. Do it peacefully. Get out there. But more importantly, okay? Because every time something like this happens, we see the protest, we see the movement. Show it at the ballot box when it comes times to vote and
Yes.
at the midterm when it
Register
comes time
to vote early.
Vote and get out there and vote. Don't forget that, rah doesn't fill the ballot box.
That's right. So we'll see you guys there. If you want to join us, our group, just DM me and I'll send you all the information. I'm going with my own group for safety purposes because I don't know everyone in on my Facebook, so it's for safety. But you can create your own group and let's protest peacefully.
So at City Hall in Orlando.
At City Hall in Orlando.
Right across from the Dr. Phillips Center.
Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay.
We are, at least for our group, we're meeting at a friend's house, and at the group we're gonna just drive together, and they're gonna drop us off. So that way we're not stuck in downtown after it's over.
Saturday at what time?
Saturday from 5 to 7 in City Hall.
So get there early because it's downtown. It's hard to park, and you want to be able to walk your way over. All right, everybody, keep cool and be smart out there at the protest. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And please provide your cell phone number just in case someone decides to do something they're not supposed to. I hope not.
407-733-0640. We'll put it in the comments along with the website. You can always send us a WhatsApp as well, or to communicate instantly with us that way. And we, hopefully you don't need us. Hopefully everything goes smooth. You exercise your First Amendment rights. And I just think it's beautiful to see. Beautiful to see people out there saying what they believe and what they stand for. And that's all a part of our American discourse. We don't all have to agree, but we have the right to say it, and we have the right to assemble to say it. And just be smart out there.
All right. Thank you, everyone.